Good morning, class. Today's lesson is called Decolonizing the Sustainability Movement One-on-One. Now more than ever, we need to reimagine what a regenerative and equitable society looks like by adopting sustainable principles and practices. I think we need to get started by actually defining sustainability. So who knows where the mainstream idea of sustainability came from, class? So sustainable development first received its international recognition in 1972 at the UN conference in Stockholm focused on human development. But it gained its popularity, so to speak, after the Brundtland Commission report in 1987, where they focused on environmental degradation. So sustainability became understood, at least in the educational space or even in the mainstream space, it became understood as producing and consuming to meet the needs of today without compromising the needs of the future. So why do we need sustainability? Well, after the Industrial Revolution and through unregulated globalization, our economy became comprised of four main components: extract, produce, consume, and dispose. Extraction focused on extracting or mining raw materials and resources, and doing so in such a way that completely destroys ecosystems, degrading and contaminating water and soil sources, destroying local communities. And this was mainly through the processes of commercial, agricultural, manufacturing, and industrial. So number two is production, and production is mainly comprised of cheap labor and burning fossil fuels. And we have to understand that the atmosphere has a natural carbon cycle of absorbing CO2 and releasing oxygen through plants and through waterways and through animals. What happens is, with companies and corporations extracting an excessive amount of fossil fuels, which is coal, gas, and oil, we're increasing the CO2 emissions, outpacing the natural carbon cycle, and trapping heat in the atmosphere at an accumulative rate for hundreds of years. And this is what's creating global warming and our current climate crisis. Flooding, oceans turning acidic, deforestation, drought, ice caps melting, migration, like the list goes on. And not only that, we are completely destroying the Earth's natural defense mechanisms, the trees and the oceans and the animals that further help us protect itself from too many greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And so the last two are pretty easy: to consume and dispose. We're over consuming, and through that process we're disposing way too much. So to sum it up, the global climate system is comprised of years of an exploitive and extractive linear model that is completely supported by corporation and government. Okay, class, now it's time to turn the fuck up. Can anybody tell me why we really need sustainability? Most people are gonna say we're in a global climate crisis. Other people are gonna say capitalism. Yes, absolutely true. But what's the root of that? And that's because we haven't been confronting the crisis truthfully and holistically. The foundational tenet of capitalism is racism. The modern sustainability movement omits the genesis and the evolution of exploitation and colonialism. Before chattel slavery, the soil was our source of nourishment, of life, of spirituality. We had regenerative thought. We had local economy. We had just pure brilliance and innovation. If you look at the Mali Empire, which was one of the most powerful in the 14th and 15th century, we were fucking intelligent. Art, math, literature. If you go to Egypt, organic farmers, hydrologists, just engineers, just purely brilliant. When you go across the pond to Europe, famine, disease, poverty. In our history books, they're teaching you about medieval times and feudalism, but they're not telling you what's happening in Africa and the brilliance that was happening at the same damn time. This was sort of the overarching blueprint of the strategic displacement of African wealth. right? Slaves weren't stolen from Africa. Farmers and engineers, people with advanced skills and knowledge were stolen from Africa. We were stolen from our sustainable inheritance, period. Colonists inherently did not have that relationship with the land. For them, land equaled wealth. Land was purely transactional. And so they created these global capitalistic markets based off of exploitation and slavery. This is what created the rise in capitalism. Sharecropping, convict leasing, tenant farming, prison industrial complex, all the way to slave systems in other countries who are producing our goods. This is the foundational root. Black bodies were the scapegoat for that. So let's dig a little deeper into this system that creates this manifesto of unsustainability. And I think when we get to the idea of colonialism, I define it as a brilliantly orchestrated monopoly of ownership and control, creating a layered engineering system. I define it as having three main mechanisms. The first is public policy, which controls access. The second is education, which controls information. And the third is marketing, which controls your perception. So let's talk very briefly about those three components. So I think we need to be crystal clear that laws and policies were originally created to make Black people a permanent, non-compensated labor supply while building white infrastructural wealth so that we can become as unsustainable as possible. When you look back at the public policy timeline, starting in the 1600s with the London Company, which was pretty much a joint stock company, giving land grants to European settlers to go to the Americas so they could set up shop on expropriating native land so they could set up labor infrastructure from Black people. This was the foundation of public policy, and people have to understand that. The Homestead Act of 1862, which is my personal favorite, which was supposed to give 40,000 freemen 400,000 acres of land after 250 years of bondage, y'all. But white people realized that once Black people got that land, our level of sustainability, that's our sustainable wealth, our sustainable knowledge, our engineering, our innovation, we would fucking control the entire system. And they didn't want that. So next is education, and this controls information. Our institutional education systems are meant to diminish, devalue, and erase our contributions to sustainability. Our legacy of sustainability is completely erased. You have George Washington Carver, who is the father of sustainable agriculture. You have my girl Fannie Lou Hamer, who is the OG at creating dope cooperative farm models. Her cooperative model consisted of farming, of housing, of having a business incubator, a sewing co-op, a recycling center, health insurance, disaster relief. Look, all the layers of innovation from ancestry to present has been erased, but it also erases the colonial construct, and that's what's even more fucked up. It erases white supremacy, and so we have a movement built on false pretenses and appropriation. The third is marketing, and I think this plays the biggest role in the psychosocial conditioning system because it controls our perception. And we have to ask ourselves, who's writing the stories? Who benefits from the stories? Who's missing from the story? Marketing has done a great job of using visual and textual images to reinforce the credibility of whiteness with regards to sustainability. And that informs our society's attitudes and beliefs. The sustainability movement's biggest shortcoming, in my opinion, is the lack of transparency, and it's completely ironic. We haven't been very truthful and transparent about history. We haven't been transparent about Black and brown contributions, about how we've perfected circularity and how we're disproportionately affected by the actions of neocolonialism. We have to face the crisis truthfully.